All right, first off, just as an aside, we've got to remember where the industry's come from cane pruning for many, many years, for decades, until Ivan came up with this system, which was a quantum leap. We shouldn't look back on our forebears as being ignorant peasants, but they did what they did, and things have moved on. We need to move on as well. Now, I don't want to teach any of you how to suck eggs, but just got to try and remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to maximise, we're trying to produce a crop on these canes that have just been pulled down. We're trying to clean up the side that's going to be the fruiting side and get rid of all the fluff that's on it. And by fluff, I mean the little short shoots that they have very few internodes. They're structurally probably not going to stand it, even if they had a bunch on them, and they wouldn't reach the wires in any case. So they have to be cleaned up, because that just makes operations during the rest of the season, just that little bit more difficult. We're looking for shoots, bearers, that are probably more or less 200 to 300 millimetres apart, all the way down the cordon. So we're looking for about 4 bearers per metre of cordon, more or less. We'd love them to be evenly distributed, but in the real world, that doesn't happen. Generally, they'll have around about 16 to 20 nodes, and that'll be dictated very much by wanting to wrap them on here. So they have to be a fairly reasonable cane, a fairly reasonable pruner, a fairly reasonable bearer structurally, because the chances are that from about nodes 3 all the way down to about 16, they're going to be more or less fruitful. And by the time you put a kilo of wet grapes at it, more or less, maybe 2 nodes out of every 3, maybe a little bit less. That's a lot of weight, so they have to be structurally up to it, as does the trellis, of course. On the non-fruiting side, we're trying to produce bearers for next season, and we want those bearers to go up into the sun, because that will maximise their bud fruitfulness. Provided we have taken care of some of those other things that Ashley referred to, water and nutrition. We want those shoots to grow at a reasonable rate, not to get too excited, because if they get too excited, by that I mean the internodes are too long, we won't have as many fruitful buds on the following season. So as we cut down, and they'll be cut off there, and there might only be 2 or 3 nodes between there and there, and I've seen that. And we used to do that quite readily when we grew sultanas on Ramsey in big wide trellises, and we all ran into trouble with that. The things got too vigorous and just got out of hand, and in some ways it was a forward feeding reaction. They got bigger, so we gave them more water. They got bigger, we gave them more water, and it was the wrong response. So we're looking for bearers that are reasonable, and that looks to me pretty good. I always sort of think about 4 fingers between the nodes is more or less right. So that means that the water's balanced and the nutrition's balanced. Anyway, so we're trying to get those to grow on the non-fruiting side. When we do that, the sources of those shoots, so next season, so in spring, the shoots will take off. They'll be either the basal buds of the bearers that have been pruned off this season now, and I can't see it from my side, but Rodney's looking at them on that side. There'll be the basal buds in there, and so those basal buds may actually have a primary bud, a secondary bud, and a tertiary bud. So, and you can get all 3 taking off. It gets kind of busy, and that's one thing we'd like to avoid, and that's one reason a lot of people go back, including us, and remove 2 of those buds. Just pick out the winner and rip the other 2 off. It'd be nice if we didn't have to do that, but that's the reality. So that's their buds that are there now that we can see that were produced last season. We also will be producing bearers from buds that are buried in the wood, and they're buds that didn't take off in previous seasons, and there's a finite number of them. Now when they take off, those buds that take off just sort of seem to arise spontaneously out of the wood. They're often called water shoots or adventitious shoots or water sprouts, depends. They're none of the kind. They are there now. And when they take off, as I said, they can, as with the buds on the cut bearer stumps, if you like, they can also produce 2 or 3 shoots. But when they take off, they also, as they take off and mature into being a shoot, they will produce more buds. So it's not quite a finite supply. There's a finite supply now, but if some of those hidden, latent buds take off, they will produce more buds. And they may take off next year, they may not. The buds that come out, the shoots that come out of those latent buds won't be fruitful, or poorly so. They will also tend to be a little more, well, structurally, the range, the strength of them will range from being pretty ordinary, piddly almost, to being fairly robust, but they won't be fruitful, or seriously poorly so. But the buds that are in the leaf axils will be fruitful, or can be fruitful, if provided all those other limitations have been removed. So there's two sources of buds or bearers for next season, and it's a question of trying to get them to come out, some of them to come out, and selecting those, hopefully without too much labour input, to be the crop for the coming year, to bear the crop for the coming season. So in this case we talk about 2020. Now there's a couple of other considerations. One consideration is when we start talking about mechanisation. Oh, I should say that a lot of what I've talked about there really does require some experience in the way we do things now. For example, taking that off, you can take that off with a machine, but sometimes decisions have to be made by a human, and that tends to be a little bit more difficult. Like picking a winner for a start tends to be a little bit more difficult. Now, one of the considerations for when we start talking about serious machine pruning is just how serious we get about it, just how serious we get, and how enthusiastic we get. Because if we get too enthusiastic, we can have a lot of open wounds. Now, grapevines don't heal wounds. After 5 or 6 years down the track, you'll still see where there's bare wood. It's all dried up, but it's still bare wood. It doesn't heal over. Sometimes out of those wounds, though, on the margins where there hasn't been quite so efficient, hasn't taken back to the bare wood, you may get another shoot because there was a basal bud hidden in there, wasn't managed to be violently destroyed. Generally, though, those tiny little shoots that come out, they're pretty weak. They may grow into something better, but they're generally pretty thin and they don't amount to much most of the time. If we get too enthusiastic, we can damage the vascular tissue. That's all the tissue that's the pipe, if you like, coming up from the roots. And if we do that, that's going to upset water transport all the way to the ends of the vines. Not going to totally destroy it, but it is going to make it more difficult. So that's something to be avoided. How we do that when things get more mechanised, well, it's a little bit harder. I can't.
Michael, you're referring to the vascular tissue sitting in the cordon, are you in here?
Yep.
So that's cutting too close in there.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, all right, sorry.
So remember the cordon, you've got the bark, that's basically dead phloem. And phloem is the pipework that the plant uses to transport sugars around. So sugars from the leaves into the berries, or sugars from the leaves down to the roots, okay? Just below that is the cambium layer, and that's the layer of cells that hasn't quite made up its mind what it's going to be. If it's on the outside, it'll be phloem. If it's on the inside, it's going to be xylem. Xylem is the plumbing, is the waterworks. And if you upset that by breaking it, cutting it, you will get what is called embolism, which is basically just an air blockage. And that stops the transport. It doesn't preclude it totally, because there are many pipes, if you like. It's not a single inch pipe. It's many thousands of micrometer diameter pipe. So, but when you start hacking into it too much, you might get infected, and you will upset some of the vascular tissue, and that's a no-no. So that makes the rest of the shoots along that, the rest of the bearers and the possible shoots coming off that weaker. They just don't get enough water. It's pretty simple. Now, another thing we need to think about in the longer term, and we've probably all experienced this and seen it, is when we think about a cordon, we keep thinking it's going to go on forever. The calculations that are in the literature, and no one's actually done this, but I've tried to calculate it from the knowledge that we do have. 4 metres of cordon, it's living tissues, as is the trunk, of course. It's living tissue, and it takes energy to maintain it. 4 metres of cordon will take 1 to 2 kilos of glucose to stay alive. Now you start translating that into how many kilos of grapes you could potentially turn that into, it's quite significant. What I'm getting at is that every time we flog our vines with massive production and we don't take care of them post-harvest, remember, because the leaves are going to be on these vines for 3 months after we cut. Every time we do that, we are weakening the cordon. There is less energy available. It's for it to store, to sustain activities through winter, right into the summer. Because during summer, the biggest, it's a bit like children, they get most of our resources. Follow what I mean? The shoots and the berries, the developing bunches, have first dibs. And if we haven't got enough there, the things that miss out are the trunks, the roots, and the cordon. And if we don't watch it, the cordon will get weaker and weaker. And as it gets weaker and weaker, it is less able to push out those shoots that we need to be our bearers for the coming season. Those shoots tend to be smaller. They just won't grow as big. Now, when we come to pruning, of course, we want as many options as we can. It's a good position to be in if we can say, oh, we've got too many shoots here, too many bearers here, we can chuck a few and just pick out a couple of winners. When you've only got a couple and they only just make the other side, the first wire, your options are fairly limited, far more limited. So that's just something we need to bear in mind. Cordons are not going to last forever, and that's one issue I think we need to, as an industry, need to think about a little bit more. I'm not saying we've got to rip them off every 5 years, but I'm saying we need to manage them a bit better.